up somewhere? Are we going up anywhere? Or?
Is it? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, no
I thought
problem.
it was already connected.
All right, so why are you doing that? You all get to give us a score after this?
Yes.
Yes, we want to.
No threes. No threes.
No threes. All right, good.
Do we have, okay, there's your clicker.
Oh, you did.
For all what we heard from SACFI.
Okay, perfect. I'm done. Thank you very much. All right, I'm not good at these. What do I do? Just hit the right and left keys? Is that what happens?
Should be how it works.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about go-to-market strategies, and rather than do like a formal presentation, what I thought I would do is just put some, I think I'm going to call them random thoughts about what's worked for me. So a little bit more of a toolkit type of thing, okay? I think I was exactly where you all are today, not too long ago, and we probably have some very similar backgrounds professionally, so I'll just kind of step you through the process that I've been going through. Gonna work? Little button maybe?
Clicking it at the computer.
This one?
Control the arrow, so I just hand it.
Where's our IT guy?
On.
That's not my clicker, man.
It's gonna be the IT guys.
You
There
just
we
probably
go.
turn it on. You gotta
You just
Adapt.
pretend to click. and I'll
Click
push
at it.
That's called a pivot right there.
I like it.
Fluid intelligence, right?
All right, so I thought I would start with the obligatory, just a little bit about me, so you know what my deal is. I'm a technology person. I spent about 15 years as a technology sales and an actual technologist. So most of that time was spent at Oracle Corporation. I built data warehouses and things like that. I was traveling all around the country, working my butt off, not making that much money, and I saw the sales guys were making a whole ton of money, so I decided to go into sales. And I made some pretty good money there, but my soul was getting sucked out of me a little bit at a time every single day. So I decided to start my own company. This is now the one that I'm currently involved with is my fourth startup company. So I sold one, I got bought out of another. The third one I won't talk about. And then this fourth one is an ongoing concern that I have. So the one that I'm working with today is a company called Pondera Solutions. So just to give you a quick idea of what we do. So you all probably heard stories about like the cancer doctors that are stealing money from the government by treating healthy patients as if they have cancer, and then billing to the government and actually poisoning people, right? Stories like that abound. People that create fictitious businesses, and then they do fake tax returns against those businesses, and by the time the authorities find out that it was a fake business, they're gone, and they've stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from the government. We actually busted a guy about 3 weeks ago in Folsom that was doing that, coincidentally about 5 miles from our office, but he was actually ripping off Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and Michigan. So he had created some businesses and was doing these things in other places. So that's what we do basically by leveraging the power of cloud computing and advanced analytics, very similar to what you do or looking to do in the restaurant business. We do to fight fraud. Okay. So I started back in 2011, went through the accelerator, as Mariah mentioned. I quit my job. I funded my current company out of the last one. I only go full in. I'm like this. I have no sort of in-between meter. So I went a couple of years without a paycheck, no revenue, no nothing. So don't get discouraged. I didn't make any money until 2013 was our first client. And then we've been growing pretty steadily since. We did take a round of financing in June, which was our first one. We're actually profitable. We're doing well, but we wanted to really start growing, and we were starting to attract attention of IBM, Accenture, people like that, and we just thought it'd be good to have some partners on board in order to really start growing faster. So anyway, that's where we are today. Enough about me. So this is my random collection of things that have worked for me, so maybe they'll work for you. That's basically what I want to talk about. And these were sort of the areas that I thought sort of made sense, things that for me are sort of guiding principles in any business that I start. Just how do I select markets and how it might work for you all. I'm an enterprise software person. I'm not an app person, but I do think every market has or every application or business has a market that you're going after, and understanding that is really important. Okay. Some sales delivery ideas. I put direct in parentheses because if you have a direct sales market as opposed to more of a marketing sales effort, like if you were going to go into restaurants and try to pitch it, you probably have somebody go to restaurants. It wouldn't be an ad in the newspaper, hey, restaurants come get me, right? So I'll talk a little bit about that. Am I out of time already?
No.
All right. a little bit about value propositions that, why should we buy you, which we made some comments about, a little bit about testing messages, and then I like to tell stories, so the way I described my company, right, was I was talking about that cancer doctor, right, or someone that creates fictitious businesses. I know Mariah talked about that a lot. Hey, give us some examples, because I think examples make things come to life, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Does that sound good?
Sounds awesome.
All right, great. All right, so market selection. Somebody told me this once, and it's true, just because you're ready to enter a market doesn't mean it's ready for you. So, for example, in government, there's 2,300 subsidy programs. Did you guys realize that? So like Social Security, phones, rent, energy, Medicaid. My company's in 4 of them today. So, everybody, and I can't go anywhere without somebody saying, hey, why don't you do it in this program or that program or commercial or insurance and things like that. Well, the reason is that just because we think we're ready to go in, the market may not be ready to accept us, and you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money wasting it. So here's how I select markets. Thank you. This, to me, on the left side is sort of how we want to look at markets. And for me, it's got to be very research-based. I won't go into a market unless I really understand it. That's why I asked you if you understood restaurants. I know everything about government fraud. And I can tell you that. I think I know more about it than anybody in the country, and I will pound the table and tell you that. The reason why is because I study it like crazy. And I talk to people, I experience it. I talk to bad guys, right? I've visited people that have ripped off government programs that have just gotten out of prison, and I go understand how they're ripping off the government. So I know it. So understanding the market is important. I also think it's really important now that you have a very structured approach. So here are the things that I'm going to do to look for my market, and then that you're disciplined, and that it's simple and you can understand it. It's very easy to lose discipline as an entrepreneur. I talk about the shiny balls all the time, right? I turned down, when I first started my company, Google offered for us some, because they knew I wasn't making any money and Google was working with us, and they said, hey, there's a chance to implement Google Apps, like mail and all that, for the city of Raleigh, and it was like $400,000. I'm like, that's not what we do, and they said, I know, but you need the money. I said, not doing it, because it's just a shiny ball, it's going to distract us from where we want to go, so I was very true to that vision. So this is just a simple example on the right-hand side. This is what we do. I only enter a market if there's demand, if we can be disruptive, if it's repeatable, and if it's funded. Those are my 4 things. And some of them are pretty obvious, but I'll give you an example, like the National School Lunch Program for kids. That is one of the highest fraud rate programs in the country, so about 30% fraudulent. Okay? Now, it's not the kids, right, but it's the businesses that are making money selling, and sometimes they don't even sell, they're just fake
How they
businesses.
calculate the kids that are supposed to get the subsidy.
A lot of that, right? Here's the issue, and here's why I'm not in it. There's no demand, nobody cares. So I think I might be able to have a big impact on it. Who cares? Nobody's going to pay for it because there's no demand. We looked at the credit card industry. There's a whole bunch of people that are already doing work in there that are really smart and are probably smarter than we are. I can't be disruptive. I might be 3% better, 3% less. I'm not interested. I'm not going after it. So I just go down that list. And to me, for market selection, everybody should have a very simple list like that. I don't care if it's 4 things, 2 things, 3 things, whatever, but if I ask you how do you select your markets, you should be able to tell me. Okay? I talked about this earlier. I'm a real big believer in specific strategies over broad ones. Well, I went to business school. I got a marketing and international business degree before the internet, so that's the most worthless degree ever now because it all changed. The one thing I really remember is specific strategies win over broad, and it's a lot easier to be specific and then go broad than to be broad and then end up specific. So I try to be very specific on what we do, and I think that's just some food for thought. Okay, next. All right. By the way, I usually would prefer talking, but you said there are going to be questions, right?
There probably will be.
Okay. I'm clearly not a salesperson anymore because I just like building effective teams. This is chapter 3 of the business book. I haven't started writing yet, but I believe that really talented people are often jerks, and jerks aren't always really talented people. And that's just from experience. I brought on some really, really talented people early in my business when we had 2 or 3 employees that really helped my business. They were loyal, they were hardworking, they were smart, they really helped to build the company up. But when we got a little bit bigger and they couldn't get along with other people, we had to let them go, which was really unfortunate because they should be enjoying some of the success of the business now. I would say, and this is just sort of one of my random thoughts, make those decisions quick because they can really hurt business. I was telling you earlier I would never start a business again with a partner. I think I heard somebody talking about partner problems, maybe overheard. If you got a partner and it works, fantastic, I'm happy for you. I think it's tough to start a business with 2 people, at least have one person in charge. All right, next. Random on building teams. Big Rolodex doesn't always translate into big sales, so if somebody says, oh, I know everybody in this market, who cares? That just might mean they're comfortable getting turned down by people in the market. And they're not real salespeople, so I hate to get fooled by salespeople who say, oh yeah, I know everybody. I'm a huge believer in motivational fit. I only want to work with customers that want to work with me. I only want to work with partners that want to work with me. I only want to work with employees that want to work with us. If they're really great, but there's not a very good motivational fit, I'm just not very interested. I realize these are random, but hey, they're from my experience. I'm also a huge believer in innovation coming from adjacent markets. So, we are a government fraud detection company. I know I saw you today at the award. We got a local award here in Sacramento today. And the guy who's our head of our R&D is a PhD in cognitive and mind sciences or something like this. He studied kids and how they learn algebra, and then when they stop learning, how they cheat. And that has very little to do with fraud, but what he did was he was able to map how the human mind works, and then we were able to apply that to fraud, so that instead of just finding indicators of fraud after it occurs, we started studying how fraudsters' minds work so we could predict what they were going to do next. That's a very interesting thing when you combine that with prediction algorithms and things like this. Came from a completely adjacent market. So I think sometimes it's great to have that expertise, and I was criticizing some of you guys for, okay, tell me what you do yourself, like are you a restaurant guy? But I also think it's important to bring things from the outside as well. Good. I'll skip my bucket theory. All right. A little bit about value propositions. I'm a big, one of the companies that I started that, I can't remember what it was, I'm old now, but it was, it worked with the large systems integrators, so my clients were IBM and Accenture and Deloitte, companies like that. And I was trying to help them, coach them on what value propositions were, and I was so obnoxious. I would go into their office and they were going after a new market or opportunity, and I would say, don't tell me what your value proposition, let me tell you what it is. And I would just tell them. And they would go, they would turn white and go, that's exactly what we were going to say. Well, that's not a value proposition. That's junk. So that differentiation and what true differentiation is and a value proposition is, I think is really critical. And if you haven't figured that out, I don't think you start a business. And I think you talked about that earlier, right? Really, really important to understand it. So, my thing about it is, which was on the previous slide, which is it's not enough to be a little bit better. I think I mentioned that to someone tonight. When I started my company, my idea, the current company, my idea was that we could take this cloud computing, and Google decided to partner with us. Massive computing power and these neat analytics, and we could solve fraud, waste, and abuse like companies like IBM and others couldn't, because we're going to leverage all this computing power. So we got this data from Florida's Medicaid system, a beta program, huge amount of data. We crunched it all, and our results came out, and we were probably 5 or 10% better than what was available in the market today. And I went, oh my God, we're like 3 guys in Sacramento. We can't be 5% better and get a $10 million contract when our competitors are IBM and companies like that. They're just going to go with IBM. So I almost took it out back and shot it. But we decided to go back and go with some different approaches, because this incremental improvement just wasn't going to be enough. And that to me is where real innovation happens. We started over, I got some real smart people in, I threw them into a bucket, said figure out the problem, don't think about the way it's been done before, which is where I think adjacent markets come in. And the result was we were 40, 50% better. Then people are willing to pay for us over these companies that we were competing with. I was not going to go to market with a product that looked a little better or acted a little bit better. For me, I had to be a lot better. So that's a guiding principle of mine. All right. So what's an effective value proposition? This is I like simple tests. This is a simple test that I think is a good thing to put a value proposition through. Number 1 is important to the customer or market. I'm amazed at how many people create a value proposition, and it's like the customer goes, I don't even care. That's not important to me. So you have to know what's important to the customer. It's got to check that box. If it's not, it's a so what proposition, I guess. Do you do it better than the competition? Do you truly do it better than the competition? Otherwise, it's a lose proposition or a tie proposition. So be disciplined, you should be able to check these things. And then the third thing is really important, can you prove it? If you can't prove it, and you just say you're better than the competition, it's not a value proposition. So I think the propositions that you guys were doing today, I would challenge you to very quickly and effectively say, here's why it's important to the customer, here's why we do it better than the competition, here's my proof points. Okay, if you can't do that, I'm gonna look at it and go, maybe you're winning, maybe you're losing, maybe you're tied, I don't know, but I don't think you're gonna win. Not as a startup. I'll put a little Stephen Covey in here. To seek first to understand, then to be understood. Because I think a lot of us fall in love with our own ideas, and then we think everybody's going to love it and we shove it out, but we really don't understand why other people would love it first and what their pain point is. So I know it's simple, but it's an easy way to go through it. Yeah. All right, other just little things. No matter how simple or complex your sale, there's only 2 or 3 reasons why people are going to buy you. Okay? People think that, here are the 20 things that make me different. That's like a sea of nothingness after the first 2 or 3. So finding those 2 or 3 that I think are really key. This other thing, I think a lot of people tend to think that when they're pitching somebody, that's the first time somebody's been considering their product. When really somebody, if they're in the buying cycle, they don't come into a buying cycle when you've gone into the selling cycle. And typically when someone's in the buying cycle, they've already done their own homework on the internet, they've talked to people, they've seen other sales pitches, and they have assumptions. And until you understand and unhinge those assumptions, anything you say is just going to be lost on them. Okay, so I'm a real big believer, again, in understanding where the customer is in their cycle, what they already think, what they already assume, what their perceptions are, because if you just plow over those, you're going to lose all credibility. And I believe that's true in an enterprise sale, complex selling, or even just some real simple selling. Is any of this stuff making sense?
It does.
Okay.
Very good.
I have to check because I'm like, it's just going. All right. I think the last one's obvious, but I used to work with these big companies, and I used to tell them, here I am again with a little simple thing. I said, if you're going to sell a big software system, you're judged on 5 areas: your team, your people, your product, your implementation plan, and your cost or your deal. And I would find that certain companies would just pound one of them. They'd be like, man, we got the greatest technology ever, these are all the things that we do, we're way better than everybody else. And the customer's going, yeah, and they agree. And then it would end. And they'd lose on the other 4, and they completely won on the 5th area, so they end up losing the deal. And that's why the best product doesn't always win, right? Or the best team, or the best person, or whatever it is. So I think it's important to have sort of that balanced approach based on what the customer thinks is important. I've made that mistake about 10 zillion times in my life. All right, next. All right, next. I don't have any cute quotes on that one. All right, just little bits on selling. I'm a huge believer in not fighting fair. So, we talked about, when I started Pondera, nobody was going to buy Pondera. I was going after 10, 20, $30 million contracts, and people were not going to give that to Pondera. So what I did was I made a partnership with Google. I just leveraged personal relationships. Google was having a lot of trouble at the time with the government. Like, they were building like robot dog armies and stuff, and everybody was afraid of them, and privacy and all that. And I said, hey, here's a great way for you to look good for the government. You're going to help the government. You're going to help them show them responsible government, all these types of things. They bought. So once they bought, then I went in with Google's business card. And I'm, a Google partner and all that. I had $0 of revenue, all that kind of stuff. Well, you know what? That was totally unfair to any of my competitors, and I killed them. That's the way you have to do it, right? So always looking for an unfair advantage like that. I will not fight any of my competitors in their battlefield because they're just too big. So I'm always changing the battlefield on them, right? I mean, I'm going to lose to IBM if it's about hardware and software, but if it's about SaaS and a solution, you don't buy hardware and software. In fact, I don't talk to the technical people. Why would you ever talk to them? They have nothing to do with this. Then the battlefield just moved from here to here. They're still fighting over here. I'm now fighting over here, and I'm going to win every time.
Take yourself out of competition.
Absolutely. People ask me who my competition is. I have no competition, honestly. I compete with tons of people, but if I lose, it's because we screwed up and we didn't define the battlefield right. 100% believe that. And by the way, we do lose, but that's our fault because we literally just didn't define the battlefield right. I'm going to skip that third one, making the comps look bad. I'm a big believer in this. If you can't sell yourself, don't sell your own product. Get somebody else to do it for you that's just as passionate about it. So I get teased, I get called Bugsy a lot at my company. Do you guys know Bugsy Siegel? Have you heard of the whole story, the starting of Las Vegas and all that? So I've been accused of taking some people out to the desert and saying, can't you see it? It's Las Vegas. And getting people to come work for me for free and all that kind of stuff. That, I believe, makes me a good salesman. Okay, we used to have a board member that's, a guy that is the first board he's ever joined. He's a Harvard professor. He's a national expert in fraud. He's in front of the Senate and Congress all the time. He'd never joined a board before, but he joined our board because that was my job, was to go out there and sell them. I can leave the selling of the product to other people, but I'm telling you, if you can't do the first part, which is sell yourself, get somebody else to sell the product for you. And then this one, I think it just goes to persistence. This was in a Harvard Business Review magazine a bunch of years ago, which I think is really interesting. It was that an average complex sale. So I don't know all of your businesses, but like you would have, I think, a relatively complex sale. You can't go to a restaurant and expect one pitch and, hey, they bought it. They're gonna say no, guaranteed. So you have to expect that, and you gotta go back. So the average one is actually 7 touches, and most people quit after 3. I think that's amazing. So, something to think through. All right, keep going. Am I out of time?
No, you're doing great.
Okay. All right, a couple other weird, quirky things of mine. I went into an existing market with my last company, which was fraud detection. I don't believe that I really do anything that anybody else can't do. I mean, that would be pretty arrogant for me to think that my 50 employees can do what IBM or SAS or SAP or one of these companies can't do. Come on. But what I am doing is what they won't do. And I know that it's very, very difficult for these companies to change their business models to compete with me. So take like an IBM. IBM likes to, is anybody here from IBM, by the way? I should have said everything. I do partner with them sometimes too, by the way. But they like to sell hardware and software. I sell, hey, you don't have to buy any hardware and software. That's very difficult for IBM to do because they make a lot of money on hardware and software, right? Or a services company. You don't need people on site going through finding fraud and going through all these claims. Well, that's what, the services companies like Accenture and Deloitte do. So, it's not that they can't do what we do, but they won't because it would break their business model. And I'm a really big believer in looking for those types of things. You mentioned one earlier, right? That's a disruptive business model. The blockbusters, the real estate business, those types of things. They're just so stuck doing what they're doing that they're really vulnerable. I really find those types of markets super attractive because that's when a small company really can come in and all of a sudden you can make some waves. They're never going to change. These guys are never going to change to fight with us, and I don't want to fight with us. All right, I don't think, I was going to talk about some things that I think are more enterprise selling, so I don't think it's appropriate here, so next. All right, I went to a business school. I spent a semester in Australia. It was super fun because I barely worked at all, and it was a really neat place. And I was really fascinated by the fact that, there was a zillion different car models in Australia. Has anybody spent any time in Australia? Yeah? Where were you?
I was in Sydney
Sydney.
and Brisbane
Awesome.
a long time ago.
Yeah, me too, unfortunately. I was in Sydney, at University of New South Wales, and I asked my professor, I'm like, why are there so many car models here? And he's like, yeah, I'm not joking. If it blows up here, nobody hears about it in the rest of the world. So it's a big test market for a lot of manufacturers, right? So I'm a big believer in being able to do some testing. I saw you doing A/B testing and things like that, but that's potentially blowing up a market segment. I like to test in places where if your car blows up, maybe a couple people die, but your business doesn't die. So just like the automotive manufacturers in Australia. And I'm joking about that, by the way. Next. So, for me, that was actually Iowa. That was our first account. People always say, well, why'd you get started in Iowa? I'm like, Iowa. I mean, if we didn't do very well, nobody would really care. So now I love Iowa because they're my greatest client ever, and they've renewed with me every year. And I was telling you I'd like to move to Iowa. But I think finding something like that is really important. So, pick your initial customers very closely. Just my thoughts on once you get started and you start getting customer feedback. I like customer feedback and I hate customer feedback. I like it because you're giving the customer what you want. But I think anytime you're building a product around what a customer says they want, then the customer is defining the price point. I really believe that. Because they're telling you, I want this, and what they're asking for is something that's a little bit better than what they had before, and then they're willing to pay a little bit more for it. So I think it was Henry Ford that said, you know, if I'd listened to the market, you know, we would have built a faster horse, right, instead of a car. So I believe that, you know, true innovation comes to the market instead of from the market. So we're going to show you how to do this, and then there's a value that you determine the price on. So, you know, I'm going and I'm selling my system for millions of dollars. I can sell it for anything I want. You know, there's a limit, but the customer's not going to tell me what to pay for, because they don't have anything like what we've got, and I think that's really important. All right, last thing here. I think this is I should really like cite my quotes, right?
That would be.
Yeah, well, I didn't go to, did you go to Harvard? I did not go to Harvard Business School, okay? So, I don't cite my quotes. Tell me a fact and I'll learn, tell me a truth and I'll believe, tell me a story and it'll live in my heart forever. I'm a huge believer in telling stories, and I heard a couple today, but just, you know, personal stories. I think you were talking about that. Tell some personal stories about restaurant owners, about whoever it is. That just makes a huge difference. And I think for when I went out to get capital, and I talked to everybody about capital, and we weren't actually looking for capital, but they started coming to us, and then we said, okay, let's talk to a bunch of people. VCs, private equity companies, strategic companies, all of that kind of stuff. Very interested in me and my team, very interested in hearing stories and understand that we understand the market, the mistakes that we made, how we learned from the mistakes. They didn't just want to know, you know, just the basics and the finances. In fact, our finances were kind of a disaster. But they wanted to hear stories. So the more personal you can make it, I think the better, especially when you're going after, you know, money and capital. All right, so just, you know, examples, you know, why is your business so important to you? You know, my story I think is a little less compelling about why my business is important to me than it probably is to a lot of you all, but it really matters to me. You know, I'm a responsible government guy. I've been working on these deals with, you know, partners that were, I worked on the California Medicaid deal with, at the time it was Xerox, they won, it was a $1.5 billion deal. That bid had about 1,000 requirements in it. Okay, there were 3 for fraud, waste, and abuse. 3 requirements out of 1,000. Do you guys know how much money is wasted to fraud, waste, and abuse in the California Medicaid program every year? It's about $8, $10 billion. Do you know what that money's used for? It's for human trafficking. It's for gun smuggling. It funds terrorism. It's not just little mom and pop taking money. That bugs the crap out of me as an American, as a responsible, you know, government person. And it was a really passionate thing to me. It bothered me forever. And then when I went to Google, and Google, yeah, it was a different thing. They were asking me to do a little consulting work for them. But when I saw some of the technologies, this fraud, waste, and abuse thing had been bugging me for years. And I said, that's it. And I started the business a week later. That's my story of why I started. You've all got your story. Yours are probably more compelling and personal than mine. Go for it. You know, and I think those are really important. I almost shot my business like 10 times. I think I told you one. I can tell you some others. I tell you, I learned from every single one of them. And you know, you guys, I know you were talking about that earlier. It's hard starting a business. I mean, I didn't make any money for a long time. And then when I did make money, I used it to hire really good people. So I still wasn't making any money. I felt like my job was to manage the business to $0 at the end of every month. And I say that kind of jokingly, but you know, if it was more than 0, then I wasn't growing fast enough. If it was less than 0, then I had to, you know, cut the check for payroll. And I had to cut some 6-figure checks to make sure I made payroll rather than letting people off. So, you know, it's hard. It's hard to start a business and run a business, but if you're passionate about it, you'll get there. And then, you know, I got lots of stories. If anybody wants to get a beer, and we'll talk about some really creative bad guys. Amazing how smart bad people are. And some of the things we've stopped. And, you know, the PEs really like that, because they like to see, well, no, it's really interesting. You guys really understand the market. I think that's it. Is that it? Yes! I knew that was it! All right. So that's it. Those are all my random thoughts. I hope some of them are helpful, and probably most of them aren't, but that's okay. Yeah?
Can you talk about your funding experience?
I'm just getting over it.
You
Because
said,
of support groups.
you said you recently got funded here locally or from the Bay Area?
Yeah, so we, the lead funder was a company called Sarin Capital out of San Francisco. And then Impact was also part of the deal. I thought that was important, number one, because they supported me for a number of years, including the accelerator that we went through, and I like the local flavor of that. It was interesting for me. So when I first went out, and I would say don't get discouraged, because I tried to get funding back in 2011 when I came up with this idea, and nobody wanted to fund me. And I think the reasons were, number one, I'm not 20 years old, and that does make a difference, right? I mean, especially in the Bay Area, funders, they look for really young people, and I'm not a young person. It wasn't a dating application, it was an enterprise application, and number three, it was government, and who wants to sell to government? So I was telling everybody, it's 40% of the GDP, and you got 95% of companies chasing the other 60%. Why not go into this place over here? Nobody wanted to listen. Then all of a sudden you start getting some contracts, and then everybody wants to talk to you about funding your business. So we weren't actually looking, but when we did, we decided actually to hire a banker. So we had a banker that helped manage it for us, because I had actually sold my last company, a private transaction, didn't need to go through any kind of big help. And then the process was super interesting. I think the hardest part was early, we sort of would accept everybody coming in, come out to see us, we'd go down to the Bay Area. And it became very apparent, because we were trying to run a business, that you need to screen the guys that are coming to you just as much as they do you. And I would just say to people, okay, look, I'm government, I'm 50 years old, here's what we do, are you sure you're interested? Oh yeah, we're really interested. And I'd say, well, tell me one other company that looks anything like us that you've ever funded. Well, we're just getting into this space. I'm like, thank you. And a lot of these are really big funds and companies, but I think we wasted a lot of time. It was exhausting going through that process. So I just sort of that work with someone that's right to work with, I like to work with people that like to work with us. I think it was true for funders too. The team that we got with Sarin and Impact, I'm the happiest guy in the world. And I know it's never going to be perfect, nothing, and we'll have our ups and downs, but they're so aligned with us. We wanted to continue to operate our business. I wanted to continue to own a very big piece of the business, because I'm very bullish on the future of it. The amount that we wanted to put into the business and the amount that we wanted to put into our personal bank accounts, they agreed with. Hiring a management team, all of those types of things we were very aligned on, and that would be the only way that I would go.
So you said you had this idea in 2011, so that was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So you were self-funding for how many years before you finally got funded?
I took our first funding in June of this year.
Wow.
So for the first couple of years, we had no money, but I had a small team, but I was putting, so for me, and remember, this is different, so it wasn't an app, I was building a system.